and welcome to Skeptic Smash Talk. Today's show is a special episode as I'm joined by the author of Only an Atheist Can Help God Save the World, Matthew James. And the reason I say it's special is that we don't just talk about his book, which I can honestly say is brilliant. If you like the comedy stylings of the likes of Terry Pratchett or Douglas Adams, I think you'll enjoy this book. But we also delve into local and international politics, and towards the end of the show, we talk about the process of getting books published and out to the masses, which is something you don't often hear about. So be warned, this isn't just another 8 out of 10 book review by any means. We actually talked for over 2 hours when we recorded this. I needed to condense everything down to about an hour, so expect some outtakes in the coming month or so. And because we did spend some time on politics, if you just want to listen to the discussion about the books and the process of writing, I'll have the timestamps in the show notes so you can just skip past Matthew and I solving all the world's problems. So let's just get on with it. So joining me now is the author of Only an Atheist Can Help God Save the World, Matthew James. Matthew, welcome to Skeptic Smash Talk.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Thanks for joining us. So we'll get to the book in a moment, but let's talk about you first. Let's do the behind the author part of the interview. So tell us all about yourself.
So my background is neuroscience. I have a degree and PhD in neuroscience. So obviously I was at university for a very, very long time. Then several years ago, my wife and I moved from the UK to Canada, where we lived in Halifax, Nova Scotia for the best part of 5 years, which was a wonderful experience, brilliant thing to do. And then about 2 years ago, 2 years before now, we moved back to the UK, and we now live in the southeast of the country. I currently work Department for Developmental Neurobiology in King's College London, where I'm a centre tech, so I do all the behind the scenes background grunt work that the department needs doing.
Right, all the good sort of all the data crunching and all that sort of stuff, is it, or is it a bit more dirty than that?
Yeah, it's more dirty than that. It's like hands-on running of machinery and emptying of things, all that stuff that people realise that somebody does, but nobody ever seems to recognise.
Important work too. I think that's just
exactly.
Like you say, people don't realise all that hard work, all the real sweat and all the, in some cases, literally blood that goes into the sciences and getting all this information and getting these beautiful press releases out that the Daily Mail generally get wrong.
They do get them wrong quite a lot. I'm an atheist. That's something I should probably. When you've written a book that features not only an atheist but also the actual literal God coming into earth, people sometimes go, "Wait, what? Like, where are you coming from with this position?" But no, it's written from the point of view of an atheist, and it's a satire book for that plays fun with all these characters and all the silliness of religion.
Yeah. So were you a born again or converted atheist, or did you never have any sort of religious influence?
I think I'm one of the lucky ones in that I was always an atheist. I was raised without God. I see all these people on Twitter who, in their profile, have listed former Muslim, former Catholic, former Christian. I just think, oh my goodness, I did well to not be raised in that environment. Obviously, coming from England, we're a fairly secular country anyway, and we're increasingly heading down that secular path, which is fantastic. I think the only time I ever went in a church when I was a kid was when I was in the Scouts for a number of years, and we would go for like Remembrance Sunday parades where you end up in a church and you'd be there for a few hours. So besides going in the buildings and just going, wow, what a spectacular building, and oh my goodness, isn't it boring sitting here for hours, I never really had a lot of contact with religion. I feel quite lucky for that.
Were you always an out atheist? So for me, growing up in Australia, just for some context there, we didn't have labels. You either went to church or you didn't go to church. And I think only, I'd like to say the last 15 years or so, since internet getting stronger and the likes of Dawkins in his books, and there was never this label about atheism. So I've never been an out atheist, but I've always been an atheist, but not hidden about it or anything like that. So it's a new label for me. Was it the same here in the UK, or when you went to Nova Scotia, was that a difficulty?
I'd say it's pretty similar in that when I was growing up, it just wasn't a thing. I didn't go to church. My parents didn't go to church, and wasn't something that involved us. We weren't interested, or it wasn't like we were split away from everyone who did go to church. Just people did or they didn't, and it was their own personal business. But I agree with what you're saying that it seems to have become a bigger thing since the rise of the internet and people having a more active online presence, in that now people feel the need to label themselves and to be a part of a particular community. I mean, my profile on Twitter is a list of labels.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it's useful because people will go on my profile and they go yes or no, depending on what they see there. But I've never felt the need to label myself in that particular way. In Canada, I mean, it's probably the same as here, to be honest. Most of the people I've known in my life have been fairly similar to me, maybe not politically similar, but in terms of religion, pretty much on the same page, especially when you work in science and everyone's fairly smart and fairly well educated. And with that increasing intelligence tends to come a decreasing amount of religion. So most people, I don't know everybody, but most people would fall into a similar category, I think.
So let's look at the opposite side of that. When I went to the USA, I was the minority. You know, everybody was talking about church or going to church. And I think when I first went to America, I wasn't that out atheist. It wasn't, like I said, it wasn't anything that I just sort of thought about. But nowadays, like you say, with profiles and labels, everybody knows I'm an atheist. The opposite side of that. So in academia, especially in the sciences, the hard sciences, and when you were doing your PhD, did you have anybody sort of in that circle there that was not right-wing Christian, but strong Christian values, but was still working in the science and using that scientific method?
I have actually known a few people who, I suspect a couple of them were probably raised either Catholic or Christian, from Europe, from Portugal or Spain or Greece, or other people who probably were, if not churchgoers, and had at least some sort of religious background when they were growing up. I'm pretty sure I knew people who believed in God, even if they weren't churchgoers. Again, it was a very personal thing for them. I honestly don't remember it ever being a particularly big topic for discussion, so I might just be misremembering the way things were.
What about now? So we'll get onto the book shortly, but you've got a Twitter profile that is your book. How's the reaction from the Twitterverse been on that? Do you cop a lot of, I don't want to call it haters, but well, that's pretty much what they can be sometimes, can't they?
So far, the reaction from anyone religious has been quite muted. Like, I haven't had an awful lot of, I've had a few people come along and follow me for a while who are overtly religious in their profile, but they've usually tended to disappear pretty quickly. I've had a few people I've tweeted the book to try and say hello and like, you might be interested in this. But I mean, I'm with fellow atheists, it feels fine to do that. I'm trying to raise awareness in the book and try to publicize. With religious people, it sort of feels a bit of a cheek. Not that I mind that much, but it does kind of feel a bit of a cheat. And I haven't really had any reaction to it yet. I've had about a dozen reviews from people, some from friends, some from people on Twitter who got hold of the book from that way, some from other podcasts who've had me on and who've read and reviewed the book for me very kindly. And the reaction on the whole has been very, very positive. People seem to be really enjoying it and finding it an entertaining read. But I do expect at some point a reaction from someone who's religious, who's decided they're going to investigate this strange book that's on Amazon, and then I expect some sort of a backlash. How big the backlash is, I don't know. I mean, I'm overtly using God in the book, and I'm speaking directly for him. Now, I expect that to go down quite badly with someone at some point. It's going to happen. But to be honest, when that happens, I'm going to publicize that just as much as I publicize any other. I think it really helped me sell it to other atheists. They'll find it hilarious. The only other instance I can think of when something like that has happened is my mum has spoken to various people at work. She's been pushing the book on other people at work, and she's gotten more of a backlash so far than I have.
Really?
Where she's had people just say to her, "How dare he do that?" And I'm just going, "Yep, there it is. There's the reaction that at some point it's going to take off in some kind of way, and that should be entertaining, maybe."
Yeah. That's quite amazing, actually. So there is going to be some spoilers. We need to warn everybody, and we'll try not to spoil it too much.
Yeah. Sure.
And for full disclosure for everybody, I've not quite finished it, so there might be a few spoilers in here for me as well, which will be exciting. But what's in the book, and one of the first notes that I actually read as I was going through was I was thinking, well, this could actually, all the questions that we as atheists ask the religions, the answers to some of those questions are actually in this book. So we say, well, you know, if there's other planets out there, how did God create us in his own image? And you address that in the book, obviously.
I actually had a conversation with someone today at work about this, because in the sequel, Jesus comes to Earth and is reborn on Earth and sets about continuing God's crusade. And he's reborn into a Middle Eastern man. Because of course he would be, because that's where he was the first time he came. It makes perfect sense, except now it doesn't make perfect sense, because nobody sees him as a Middle Eastern man. And I thought that was a very clever way of playing with his myth and his background. But you immediately run into questions of, well, how far can you take this? Like, how far can you push that particular... I started writing those chunks, and my family started hearing what I was doing, and I got very quickly shut down for certain avenues to go. I mean, I've still written the book. I've still written it exactly the way I wanted to write it, but certain bits were either changed or removed because it just feels a little bit risky to be going too far in that direction. To be honest, the blunt of my, the target of my satire is Catholicism and Christianity. And it's much easier. Frankly, I don't know enough about Islam to really do much with that subject. I'd much rather go the dogma route of satirizing Catholicism. There's plenty to play with in that particular playground without worrying about going, who knows down the road where I might go in the future. But for now, yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's go to the first book, a synopsis. Give us a rundown, as much as you can without too many spoilers. What's it about?
So when the book starts, God has lost control of his divine kingdom. He was formerly a wrathful, vengeful God of the Old Testament who inflicted plagues upon everybody, particularly the humans, who he finds particularly frustrating. And eventually, over time, the angels got sick of not listening to him. So they built up a bureaucratic machinery around him to restrain him. When you join him in the beginning of the book, he is no longer able to get anything done. He simply cannot work the machinery to actually get things done. And even to the point where he's no longer in charge of his kingdom. It's Metatron, his former voice, who is now the grand boss. So when he receives a report telling him that we are completely destroying our world, which we are doing,
of course, yeah,
at quite a pace, he is understandably upset. He's very fond of humans, of Earth, despite the fact that he finds us so frustrating. Actually, that's one of the things he likes about us, is we're so bloody belligerent. And so he has to then try to use the machinery of heaven to get us to change our ways. And the only way he can do that is to then actually come to Earth and try to speak to us and try to influence us directly. Unfortunately, he's working under some very restrictive guidelines, because of course he is, because he's dangerous and he can do a lot of damage to us if he's set loose. And the twist on the book is that the only person who can help him is an atheist called Jeffrey, who lives in London. He's the only person who can actually see what God is. He can see his divine light. And so the two of them, after some discussions, then go on a quest to attempt to reach humanity on some level and actually say to us, hey, you need to stop what you're doing or you're going to kill yourself, which we are doing and we know we're doing, and we're really stupid about it. And so the book plays with this crusade, this quest, and has a bit of fun with how they go about trying to actually convince people that we should stop doing what we're doing. On the flip side to that, Metatron sends a demon, because of course Metatron's in charge of heaven, so he has lots of resources at his command, including the demons of hell. And he sends one of these demons to shadow God and keep an eye on him, and then, if necessary, prevent him from achieving his aims via means that he doesn't want. He doesn't want that to happen. He would rather let humanity crash and burn, and then use it as an example to the rest of the universe of what you shouldn't do. Yeah. So I don't really want to go any further with that.
No, that's perfect. So Metatron is, and you address this in the book as well. For most people, they know about Metatron from Dogma. the movie Dogma we're talking about. And whenever I think of that movie and the Metatron, I think Alan Rickman, because obviously he played a brilliant role there. But now I start thinking of the Metatron still as Alan Rickman, but more of the Professor Snape type character than the role he played in Dogma. And again, so we don't want to spoil it too much and don't give too much away, but the other character that we've not spoken about yet is the devil, Satan. And all of a sudden it kind of starts to feel that the guy downstairs is still a public servant, a guy that wants to do the best that he can. And that's what he's trying to do, but he's not happy in his lot and he wants to try and do a little bit better. Am I reading that right?
You're free to read it any way you want. I mean, to be honest, Lucifer's a bit part in that book that just somehow ended up finding his way in. I mean, I don't even know why. I think I even had a discussion with my mum at one point where I was saying, just before I released the book, I don't know whether I should keep this bit in there. It doesn't really feel like it adds that much. She was like, no, keep it in. He's brilliant. I love him. And funnily enough, he's going to be a much, much bigger part of the third book. And it's funny because when I wrote the first book, it was this relatively short, done in one book, and I thought, great, done. I moved on to a separate series that I'm writing. It's a sci-fi series. And it's not so much that I swore I wouldn't go back. It was just more that it was finished and done. And then the idea for the sequel came up, and I was like, now I have to write that because that's just too good of an idea to not do. And then the third one, I knew where the first finished pretty much as soon as I started writing it. I knew where the second finished in the same sort of way. The third one is going to be, I think it's going to be more interesting for me to write because I know the beginning, I know a couple of bits in the middle, but I don't really know where it's going in the future. Plus, so the first book is Jeffrey the Atheist and God. The second one is Jesus and Jeffrey's wife, Melissa. So that it moves forward in time about, 10, 15 years, so quite a lot.
Right.
And the third one will be Lucifer and Melissa's daughter, so Jeffrey's wife's daughter. And by this point, it's starting to get quite complicated, so I won't go into it.
That's fine, yeah.
The third one will be called Lucifer and Lilith, and then it's all going to be about Lilith and the future generation rather than the current generation that I'm dealing with in this book.
So let's talk on that just quickly. How does a scientist go from writing thesis to writing about theology?
It's a good question. It's the question that everyone's always asked, isn't it? Is where you get your ideas from and what the hell gave you this idea in the first place. So I started writing short stories about 10 years ago. And one of the short stories I wrote was all about a perfect little girl being visited by an angel and being granted a wish. And it was a typical be careful what you wish for story. But the angel in the short story was kind of one of the angels from this book where he loves bureaucracy and he loves those sort of things. And when I started writing the Only an Atheist, the first scene that I wrote was Jeffrey meeting God. Like that's the first bit that came to me when I was writing it. And it's God turns up in Jeffrey's living room and they have a conversation, and where does it go from there? So then from there, I had to go back to where the book starts. I had to try and figure out how does God go from wherever he is at the beginning of the book to meeting Jeffrey, and why do they need to meet, and then where does it go from there? As to why I wrote it, it was tremendous fun to write. Like once I'd started it, once I'd written the first few chunks, I couldn't stop there. I had to see where it went, I had to go back and start at the beginning. And I also wanted to see whether I actually could do this. Like when you're a writer, when you're an aspiring writer and you've not finished anything or it's a really big challenge when you're facing that. I want to write a book. I want to finish a book. I don't even know if I can finish this book. I don't even know how to do that. And then, of course, once you finish the first draft, which is a wonderful feeling, you've only just started. Like that's really the very first step if you're going to continue with it. So going back to the thesis you just mentioned, that is tremendous for the editing stage. I even find that the writing stage is the fun bit, and it's hard work and you have to keep going and you need to be dedicated. But that's not all that difficult to me. What's difficult is the editing stage, which sucks. And you have to read it and reread it and go back and reread it and edit it and put in. I even hate the bit where if I printed the pages out of a chapter and I've gone through it and I've edited it, I have to put the changes back into Microsoft Word, and I hate that bit. And then my wife reads it and edits it to give me an outside perspective, and she'll give me some changes to do. Only an Atheist, by the time I'd finished it, I must have edited it 30 times.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what happened was I wrote it in the summer of 2012. when I was between jobs and science, because jobs and science are quite often very short term. So I had an 18-month gig, then I had an 8-month period where I wasn't working, and then I had another 2-year gig where I was doing a different job. And in that 8-month period, I wrote this book, and I started my sci-fi novel. And so those 2 years then gave me time while I was working to try and find an agent, because that's a long and laborious and really boring process where you get an awful lot of no's. And then when that didn't work, I'd been editing it fairly constantly for a couple of years, like on and off, and my wife had edited it. And by the time I got through that process, we moved back to the UK, and it got to next summer, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to edit this once, twice, 3 more times, and then it's done, and I'm going to self-publish.
Sure. So there's a similar story with, well, it was a book and now a movie with Matt Damon, of all people, going back to Dogma, the Martian. So again, that was a science background as well. The author of that had a science background. Couldn't get it published. Self-published turns into a movie. So that's the equivalent of what I call in the music industry rock lotto. You know, there's 1,000,000,001 bands out there, and there's some brilliant bands out there, and YouTuber making all the hit singles somehow. So self-publishing is do you think that's the future now of stories like yours?
I think it's increasingly a part of the future. Like the same way that Netflix is increasingly the future for TV and Amazon, I think self-publishing is increasingly an avenue you can go down that will or can lead to greater things. You just have to find your audience. It's a lot of work. I mean, for a start, it's hard enough for many authors who have agents and have publishing houses to get their projects off the ground. And you hear of the agonies of like the mid-list authors, people who never reach the top and just kind of sit. And, so for people who don't have that background, the resources to actually pursue this quickly, what it becomes a very long and slow slog, and you have to keep going and you have to keep pushing. So you have to be tweeting regularly, or whatever your particular venue is to get your stuff out there. You have to keep pushing. You have to keep going. I run a blog on which I post about all sorts of things, from articles about my novel or the sequel or the reviews I've had, whatever way I can self-publicize, to book reviews of brilliant books I've read, and movie reviews and articles on comics, which I'm a huge fan of. My last blog post was all about why people should get a veg box scheme from a company like Riverford. Basically, it's whatever I feel like writing about, whatever is important in my life right now. And if I can find an audience to read that as well, great. If they then take a look at my book as well, perfect. One of the biggest things you can do in this, if you can manage to get it done, if you can just start to get people reading it, just a small number of people, you can convince them with book excerpts that catch their attention and are interesting. And then if you can get a good review or two and you can tweet about that fairly regularly, people start to pay attention. They start to notice. These podcasts that many people are now running, which are really something in and of themselves, where you can talk about whatever you want to talk about. You can swear on them if you want to swear on them. You can talk about anything. One of the previous podcasts I went on, I think everybody was getting absolutely hammered, and it was tremendous fun. They edited most of that out. I didn't see much of it in the final product because they want to create a fairly professional show, but it was really fun.
Yeah. I remember one of the very first podcasts that I ever listened to was a podcast on beer and brewing. And it was a 4-hour once a week show, and they started drunk. You know, so you can imagine 4 hours down the track. So, but I think, so if we go to the other scale and let's link it in with podcasting. So podcasting, some people do for an outlet. I'll sit there after work and type out a diatribe and get angry, and they all start at one point and then completely irrelevant from where they started. So like you say, so I've got full control over that. I can say what I want. My listeners want to listen to me going off and ranting and raging and things like that. But if I was to go to one of the networks, one of the podcasting networks, all of a sudden I'm restricted in what I can and can't say, but also I must produce content, an amount of content every, be it monthly, weekly, daily, whatever the network's asking for. And I think back to the likes of J.K. Rowling with Harry Potter. So she was expected to be able to get those books out at a certain time. And I wonder, does that hurt the creativity? Does that hurt the content in the book, having those deadlines? Or do you think that authors or artists can work around that?
Well, I think there's various different things in this scenario. One of which is when J.K. Rowling became famous, her book started to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And it was like nobody was willing to say to her, no, you need to edit these down. And in that respect, you're just going, you've gotten too big for your, I don't want to say too big for your boots, because obviously she's a great writer, but you've gotten so big and so famous that now you're free to do your own thing, but it's not what you became famous for. For me, it's just been fun to kind of get a book out there and then keep writing as and when I can find the time, and then work on the sequel and get that done and dusted. And I've got nobody saying anything to me. I've got nobody saying this has to be out. The only person saying to me this has to be out at a particular time is me. I want to get the sequel out for the new year. So the sequel's called Jesus Returns, Here He Comes Again. I've got the cover. I've got the first draft done. I've done my first edit now. My wife's reading it. I want it out in January. I want to start a campaign on my tweet so that I can say 1st of January, Jesus will return. And it's a really funny and really good thing to have.
Excellent, yeah.
The cover is just brilliant. If anyone goes to my Twitter feed, you can see the cover. The first cover was done by a different lady who did a phenomenal job and then completely disappeared off my radar. Like, just vanished into the stratosphere. And I could never heard from her again. I couldn't get her back. And then I was terrified about getting a cover made that would work with it, that was as good. And then I found someone who did me the cover and completely outdid my expectations and just produced this incredible Jesus figure on the cover with the right look and the right dialogue. And it's a companion piece for the first one as well. Like, you put them side by side, they look a pair. And I couldn't believe she managed to do that. Honestly, couldn't. But it is partly the second album thing, isn't it? Like, a lot of bands, they spend 5 years touring. They produce a record of like 12 absolutely incredible songs. And then they have to produce another one in a year. And you're going, well, the last one took 5 years of experience. What do you really expect to get in the next year that you haven't got in the last 5 years? And second albums tend to be, what do they call it? The sophomore slump. I can completely see that. Personally, from a writing perspective, I think my second book is better than my first. Like, I reread it and I just think it flows better, it works better, I know where I am with it. And I think even my wife is agreeing with that as well. Like, she got very annoyed editing the first one because it wasn't there yet, first draft at that point. And that's completely understandable because I wasn't where I am now. So from a writing perspective, you should improve. Like, I really hope that most people do improve. I saw something the other day on Twitter. I think it was a meme, and it said, writers are like mushrooms. They grow best in the dark when left alone. And I kind of see their point of, like, if you want to be a writer and you want to be successful, you don't want your first book, unless it is an absolute barnstormer, you don't want it to go global.
Sure. Because
then you are completely stuck for the second. And the weight of expectation will just be remarkable and phenomenal. I read Terry Pratchett's Slip of the Keyboard the other day.
Right, yeah.
Even he was saying in those brilliant books, that, again, there's a review on my blog. I don't remember the last time I enjoyed a non-fiction book as much as that one. Terry Pratchett could deliver a joke like nobody.
Oh, yeah, he's absolutely brilliant, isn't he? Yeah.
Like, this was speeches and articles and things, and it's so fucking funny. It was brilliant. And he said in it that, in his opinion, if you want to read Discworld, skip the first two and read the third, because that's when he thought he hit the ground and could really go.
If we go back to the rock band or the album analogy, especially in the 70s and 80s, all of the best albums from the best bands were the third album.
Yeah, or the fourth or the fifth.
Yeah.
U2 didn't make it until the fifth or sixth album or something. I think they said that they were quoted as saying if they were a band in the 90s or the 2000s, they never would have made it because it took them so long to get to that point. I think you can make the same argument with the Beatles.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So just go back to the cover art again. On Atheist, it's been pointed out, and I thought, when I first saw the picture, I thought, shit, that's James Randi. Is that the first time you've heard that, or have others
That's
kind
the
of said
first time
similar?
someone's told that specific name. Other people have said it's Richard Wilson of One Foot in the Grave.
Yeah,
Which
very
is a fair
similar.
comparison as well.
Yeah.
When you sent me that's James Randi thing, and I think you then sent me a link to the Wikipedia page, and I looked it up. It is an uncanny resemblance.
Yeah.
It really is.
But if I was an artist and I didn't know who James was, let's say I'm completely out of the fold. I'm a struggling artist, and somebody sends me a job. I'm writing a book from an atheist perspective about God. You type into the Googleometer atheist and God. I'm sure James Randi's head pops up straight away on that one there. So
I really hope it's not him, because that'll get me in all sorts of trouble.
Yeah.
The cover artists usually buy their photos from like stock websites. So it's probably a case of somebody's done a stock photo shoot with a guy who looks like that, and then it's ended up on their website. The cover for Jesus Returns, the cover book artist sent me the link to a stock photo website where there was all these shots of a guy who happens to look like a hipster Jesus dressed up in all these different things. In one photo he's in a suit, in another one he's got a cell phone and he's taking a selfie. Another one he's got a laptop. Somebody clearly thought it would be a good idea to have these like Jesus-esque photos. But it worked for me because I found the photo that I just went, there you go, that's my Jesus for Jesus Returns.
So let's put the imagination hats on, and Steven Spielberg rings you up and says, we're going to make this into a movie. Who's playing what role?
I really like Richard Wilson as God.
Yeah.
I don't know if he'd be interested. I don't know. But he's the right kind of curmudgeon and not the kind of person that you would think would be God. And he could play that. It just would depend if he wanted to. For Jeffrey the Atheist, I've always been imagining somebody like Martin Freeman, just like an everyman. Again, in the realm of hypothesis, he'd be perfect. But somebody like that who's just kind of an everyday guy who does those kind of roles would work really well. As for the rest of them, I've never really thought about it. You put Alan Rickman in my head as Metatron now.
Yeah. What about Brian Blessed? Where would he be?
Yeah, that's not bad.
Yeah.
I don't think Brian for God or for Metatron.
Gee, that's tough. I think. Oh, that's tough. That is tough, actually. Yeah. Either way, but I think I'm picturing Brian Blessed as God.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, the old God. The vengeful God.
I think Richard Wilson's closer in my head because of the curmudgeon thing, because of the fed up, had enough, that sort of attitude. I can see that working.
Yeah. Certainly not. So back to Dogma, certainly not Alanis Morissette. I don't know what they were thinking there. I'm okay with the female God, but irony. That's all. I've got.
I love Dogma. Dogma's such a great movie.
It really is. And a threat of going off on a massive tangent now, but the whole the whole Jay and Silent Bob movies, obviously we know what goes through their head and it's mostly chemically induced, but how somebody can actually pick those characters and weave them into so many movies is phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal.
Well, I mean, in Dogma, they're the joke, aren't they? If you're going to pick a crusade, two people to go on a crusade, it's not them.
No.
It's anybody but them.
Yeah.
But somehow they end up in that movie as the two crusaders on the road with, I can't remember her name now.
Bethany.
The female.
Bethany.
Yeah, but who's the actress, the female protagonist?
I can't remember her name. I'm shocking
with
with it. Yeah.
That movie is so funny.
Oh, yeah. And I think my favourite in the whole franchise was the Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Just again, they've jumped on that superhero bandwagon and just completely taken the piss out of it all, which is brilliant.
Well, I mean, it's good satire. It's what you want satire to do.
Exactly, yeah. On satire, so obviously this book is completely based on satire, and we talked about the Twitter and the feedback and that sort of stuff before. How do you think that will that hold up in generally, not just in your book, but the whole sort of satirical writing style? Is that going to hold up for generations to come, or is it short-lived, do you think?
Satire? I think satire's been with us forever. I think it's one of the oldest forms of wit, the oldest forms of comedy. Everything should be free to be satirized, in my opinion. Everything should be free to be criticized and to be satirized. And if you can tear something apart with satire, it doesn't deserve to stand. Things like Spitting Image in the 80s or 90s. Just shredded politicians, left, right, and center, and made mockeries of them. And it is a tremendous shame that we don't have something like that today to do this. We've got plenty of caricatures to play with. Boris Johnson could fill a season.
Oh, God, yeah.
Theresa May would be rife for a Maggie Thatcher style.
Yeah.
Satirizing. I mean, the three Brexiteers, Liam Fox, David Davis, and Boris Johnson, I mean, crikey, you could write. There's just so much material now, and we don't have the show for it.
No.
I'm a big fan of the shows in America that do that. So Daily Show, The Nightly Show when it was with us, but now unfortunately it's not. Last Week Tonight is more serious, but still does that sort of stuff very, very well. I mean, The Daily Show, we need a British Daily Show. We really need the BBC or somebody to go, right, Channel 4 might be able to do it. Get somebody, a John Oliver style person, although he's obviously tied into HBO, get somebody like them and get a show put together, because you will find an audience in the UK and there is more than enough material to do. You just need great writing staff.
Sure. I often wonder about that, actually. I don't want to get on the sort of conspiracy theory bandwagon with the BBC, but the BBC being the government broadcaster, there's obviously restrictions, but it's such a shame that the likes of John Oliver, one of the funniest people on the TV at the moment, has to go to America to do his art. You know, in Australia, there's still a lot of satire TV, and you know, there's a whole industry in taking the piss out of politicians in Australia, and like you say, in America. But are we scared of doing it now in the UK? Are we too worried about, you know, people losing contracts, comedians not being able to sort of pick up work if they pick on the wrong politician?
I honestly don't know, but it definitely feels like there's a gap in the market. It really seems like there is a gap that needs filling, and unfortunately we haven't had. Armando Iannucci's The Thick of It is probably the closest thing we've had in the last 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
Personally, I've never gotten on with the show. I find it too cringeworthy to watch, but it is incredibly clever stuff. It's very smart TV. I don't know about the last 20 years, but the last 5 years, the BBC has definitely been under severe pressure from the government, financially and politically, to be less dogmatic and it really shouldn't be that. It should be our truth-telling, satirizing organization that tells us the stuff we need to know. And unfortunately, it doesn't be that anymore.
Yeah.
Which is a real shame. We really need the right person to get their hands back on the reins of that corporation and get it back to what it can be. I just don't know if we're going to get it.
Exactly. And for the especially the American listeners, I think the best we get now as far as political comedy or news comedy, if you like, is the panel comedy show where you've got a group of comedians, one person hosting. The host will ask a question. Somebody in the panel will do the obligatory comedy line, and then the non-comedic line to explain the story. And they're just boring now, you know. There's 3 or 4 of them. Have I got news for you? And news. What's the other one? Mock the Week. That sort of stuff. And even QI now. QI's gone to there's a question, there's the joke answer, and then there's the serious answer. You know, it's just well worn out. Yeah,
the format might be in need of a reinvention, and then you have to ask the question of: is there anybody around who's got the creativity to actually reinvent these things?
Sure.
Have I Got News for You can still be quite entertaining, but I agree that it's become a bit toothless, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's a shame.
Hi, this is the voiceover robot. If you want to have each new podcast delivered as soon as it's released, go to skepticsmashtalk.com and subscribe.
So we kind of breached the subject, so let's open it right up. Brexit. Brexit means Brexit. We know that. Nobody knows what Brexit means. Brexit actually means, but we've got we've Parliament sitting at the moment, and obviously everybody's asking at Prime Minister's question time what Brexit means, and we're still not getting the answer. So what are your thoughts? Where do you think we're going to go with this?
My thoughts are that it is a clusterfuck of enormous proportions. Cameron's government allowed this to happen, and it brought their downfall. They allowed it to happen because it quelled internal party politics, which is just bullshit of the highest order. You don't bring a referendum to shut your party up. It's stupid. They didn't run the campaign as well as they could have done or should have done, and they completely misunderstood what it was they were doing. And by the time they even had the first clue that they were doing something so dramatically catastrophic, it was all done. and Cameron was out on his ears, and the government's changed, and we now have a prime minister that nobody voted for.
That's ironic in itself, isn't it?
That does happen on occasion, that we do get a prime minister that nobody voted for. But when it does happen, people don't tend to like it. Then you have the actual, like you said, the reality of what does Brexit actually mean? Because the referendum was a simple question for an incredibly complicated situation where the entire thing just swung on a few percent. I mean, it was 48-52. It shouldn't be it isn't legally binding for a start, but the government, in my impression, shouldn't be interpreting that as, well, we have to leave everything.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you have all of these government ministers, Liam Fox, David Davis, Philip Hammond to a lesser extent, and who's the other one? There's Boris Johnson, just behaving like complete and utter fuckwit.
Yeah.
And not seeming to know. Every time somebody raises the question of, maybe this is not a good idea, they shout them down with, you're talking down Britain.
Yeah.
And you're
wait,
what? You just yelled at your chancellor because he's saying this could cause us problems down the road. You just yelled. There was a string of attacks on Mark Carney in the last couple of weeks, the Bank of England governor, who has done a phenomenal job of keeping the ship steady. And they are shouting at him and waging war in the newspapers, which, of course, is how they bring people down now, because they don't like what he's saying. But what he's saying is the reality of the situation. And he's doing his job, and he's doing it really well.
Yeah. And now he's talking about today, I think I read it was today, that he's going to sort of end his tenure a little bit earlier than expected. We are a nation that was the 5th largest economy in the world. We went through the financial crisis fairly unscathed, actually. In comparison, we come out of it okay. And so the repercussions of Brexit aside, you know, there are some people, and Carney's one of them, that really did save our ass.
We've never really recovered from the 2008 financial crash.
No.
We've just kind of kept limping along. And our economy is not doing very well, despite the low interest rates and the money being pumped into the financial system. And we were supposed to get to the point where the money could be stopped pumping in and the interest rates could start going up again. And that has never happened. It's just 8 years of the same economic situation, which doesn't help certain groups of people, savers, and it doesn't help other people. And it's never returned to normal. And my feeling now is we've been waiting for something that's going to actually change the situation, and it's Brexit.
Yeah.
Pound has tanked. Well, it is. Like,
I'm with you.
Dramatic event that's just going to make everything so much worse.
Yeah.
So the pound has now crashed quite dramatically, and everyone's saying that's great for exports, of which we have almost none.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that doesn't help. There is a housing crash coming, from what I'm reading. Everything I'm reading says it's already slowing down. It's been slowing down for about a year, but it's really stopped now.
Yep.
It's really foreign investment is going. Whoa, wait a minute, what? No, I'm going to go somewhere else. And you have these people in charge in the government, I say in charge, who just seem to have no clue what they're doing. Yeah. Absolutely none. And the one thing that business fears above all else is uncertainty. So while they keep saying Brexit means Brexit, bullshit of the highest order, and while they keep saying everything's fine, nothing is changing.
Yeah.
And this March 2017 deadline is getting closer, and then we are in serious shit once this actually happens.
Yeah, yeah. The big thing that Boris was big on it, and obviously Farage used to vomit quite often, that, you know, Europe will trade with us and they have to trade with us, and they will give us a free trade agreement because they need us. Coming from Australia, where we have a country of natural resource, the whole country is an export. You can dig a hole and export the dirt around the world. Australia exports rice to China, exports camels to the Middle East. I can't think of a single thing that the UK, the world relies on the UK to export. I can't think of a single commodity except for maybe labour, but they can find that anywhere else. And finance,
finance, that's what we have left. We have no industrial sector, we have no coal or any other mining of any kind. We have finance in the City of London, and that's it.
And they're all talking about moving over the ocean. Yeah. And why wouldn't they?
They're thinking about jumping across there's a thing called passporting, which allows US companies to come into the financial centre of London and sell their services, I think without tariffs, to Europe.
Yeah.
And we get their business because we're in the EU, except we're not going to be in the EU for much longer. So once that goes, what incentive have any of these companies got to stay with us? Unless the government says, we'll give you a sweetheart deal like they've apparently done with Nissan.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to see the details of that one too.
And so would I.
Yeah. Yeah.
If they do that with everybody, then we keep everything, but we're screwed because we're paying through the nose to keep everything.
Yeah.
So, hasn't it been fun watching the destruction of UKIP?
Oh, yeah, yeah. There's nothing left of them now. And again, it was today. Basically, the headline was whoever takes the leadership won't have a party to lead.
Farage will be back before too long.
Of course, yeah.
Diane James lasted 18 days. Stephen Nuttall left after a punch-up.
Yeah.
Is anybody even vaguely surprised that he got in a punch with someone?
Not at all. The thing that surprised me the most, especially with Farage, I don't believe a single person in government believed, or outside of government for that matter, believed that the Brexit vote or the Leave vote would win. And that frightens me for America on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Really does frighten me.
I was just going to say, since my wife and I got back from Canada 2 years ago, there have been 3 or 4 days where we have woken up and we have a radio next to our bed which comes on, plays the news. There's been 3 or 4 occasions where we have literally sat up in bed and gone, what the fuck? And so the first one was general election 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Conservatives won and nobody expected it. And all the polls have become absolutely useless the last 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
The second was unfortunately the death of David Bowie. When that happened, I was like, oh my God. Oh, Jesus, that's awful. And then the third was the Brexit vote. And we went to bed and they were saying, Remain or win. And we wake up in the morning like, what?
Yeah. Well, I was actually account supervisor in one of the accounting houses for that, and it was about midnight, and everybody's starting to realise, and obviously was that Sunderland was the first result through. I thought, oh no, and we start seeing the tickers, and we're thinking, fuck. And the room went from, there was jubilation, it's, if you've never been in a count room for a normal count anyway, they're high energy. Yeah. There's a lot of excitement in there. If you're into the political process, it's a great thing to do. The room was silent for about 4 hours. There was hardly a peep. And there were some people that were obviously happy with the result, but for the most part, nobody believed what was actually happening. And it come down to what I believe. I mean, it's mathematical, isn't it? But there was more Leave voters got out of bed and went and filled in that paper than the Remain voters. There was just that little bit too much apathy that people thought that this couldn't happen.
I think a big part of it is basically what you're saying, is that an awful lot of people in this country have gotten used to the idea that their vote doesn't count for anything, because we have a completely ridiculous and backwards political system that needs fundamental change. But unfortunately, it's not been in the interest of either of the 2 big parties in the last 50 years to change that system.
Sure.
And that system now no longer reflects anything of the political reality in our country. So a lot of people voted Leave thinking, well, it doesn't matter. My vote doesn't count. It won't matter. And then it did matter because, of course, it was a one-man, one-vote system. I think an awful lot of this reflects the reality of the situation today in politics, where people are starting to realize, or have realized for a long time, but never thought they could do anything about it, that their politics no longer serves them and hasn't done for a very long time. Since the death of the unions in the 80s and the loss of funding that kept those parties going, they've gone elsewhere for their funding. So now they're mostly funded by, including Labour, including the Tories, and especially UKIP, who are funded by Aaron Banks, I believe his name. So the people who fund them basically get their needs met.
Yeah.
And that means the people who don't pay for them get nothing.
Yeah.
And because of our political system, that's the way it goes. I think that's a big fundamental part of why they didn't see the Brexit vote coming. Because they just didn't think it could happen, didn't think anybody would be that stupid. I mean, I don't actually think people who voted Leave are stupid. I think
not at all.
I think they were misinformed, badly misinformed by a very distorted media in this country.
Yeah.
And most of the papers in this country are right wing. Most of them were for Leave because it benefits their owners to be in that camp. And like you said, the really big concern right now is that the American political system is vastly underestimating what it is that they have going on right now, in the same way that the Brexit vote did. They think nobody's going to be stupid enough to vote for Donald Trump. I think they could very well be mistaken.
Yeah. Early numbers are even suggesting now that the African American vote is significantly lower than they expected. I mean, Trump's got, was it 2% of the African American vote, which is, and that's extraordinary in itself. So 98%, it's less than that. It was nearly 90% were for Hillary, but they're not showing. They're not, so far with the early votes, they're not showing up. So Obama's getting into the media today to try and get them moving. I think Obama's the wrong person to do it. We need, the true voice in that house at the moment, and that's his wife. But if you want to rally the troops, Michelle Obama's the person to do that. She, obviously her speeches are that good that Trump's wife will openly plagiarize them. And did you see she even got rickrolled as well? Whoever wrote Trump's wife's speech put in...
Yeah, they stole it from Michelle,
Yeah, but they also put in lines from Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up.
Seriously?
Yeah. It was along the lines of, Donald will never give up on you. He'll never let you down. And there was about 3 or 4 lines. It was absolutely...
This political speech has been written by a first-year undergrad of politics.
Yeah,
Jesus. That's who Donald Trump's staff is, isn't it? They're absolute complete novices.
Oh, yeah.
I agree with you that the really worrying perspective in this situation is that the Trump supporters, the real hardcore Trump supporters, are really geared up for this fight and really pushing the envelope. And the Hillary supporters, although she's got an incredibly well-funded campaign, she doesn't have the people behind it going, we need her to win, which Obama had in the last 2 elections.
Yeah.
People really genuinely were going out for him and canvassing and putting up signs and doing all the things that I just don't think they've been doing for Hillary.
No. Actually, quite amazing is if you took Trump out of the picture, if you put anybody else in there, Clinton would be seen as, her likability ratings and her approval ratings are some of the lowest in US history. She's not, as a politician, she's not well liked at all. Donald Trump's made her look like a bloody angel, But I think her biggest mistake, obviously she shafted Bernie Sanders, and he's a little bit bitter on that. But I think what would have guaranteed the Democratic Party's victory would have been to have Sanders as the VP. But as it is now, we've got either one of those candidates could very likely, before the end of the year, be in prison.
I think this ties in with what we've been talking about politics not really representing the people. It's not really the voice of the people currently.
No.
And Bernie Sanders was the closest America has seen in a long time to an actual, real voice of the people. And you could see the enthusiasm. A lot of people on my Twitter feed, Democratic voters who loved Bernie, absolutely loved him. He has the same thing as the Jeremy Corbyn thing in the UK. He's a genuine voice that people listen to and think, right, you get it. You understand where I'm coming from. You see my problems and you actually are acknowledging them, unlike the other two, unlike the Conservatives in the UK or the Hillary camp in America and the Republicans, who will just bury their heads in the sand about the things that are actually really important. Jeremy Corbyn utterly destroyed the 3 people who ran against him in last year's election. Yeah, he destroyed Owen Smith again this year.
Yeah.
And it just tells you that there is a real craving for proper democratic representation, people who actually will listen to us. The politicians in the last 20 years have gotten very bad about actually engaging with the public, to the point where general election campaigns, every event is media managed. Every event is their own people. As soon as you put them among real people, they have no idea what to do. But that's not the case for Jeremy Corbyn or Bernie Sanders, because they know how to engage with people. They know how to discuss things and actually talk with people.
So we've got the new term that I'm hearing now with the Brexit. It's the post-truth politics.
Yeah.
And obviously that's been happening in the US for some time, but we know about it now. And all these things, and I still don't believe, if we go all the way back, I don't believe that JFK was, a 3-point attack. I think the evidence is pretty clear that it was one person. But I can understand now how people can believe some of if not all of the conspiracies. It's starting to open up minds thinking, well, if they can do that, if when she was Secretary of State, she can set up a private email server so that there's no FOI requests come in for them talking about who they're going to let win an election in the Middle East, fuck, where do we go from there? Anyway, shall we get back to the book quickly? Book's available as an ebook, not available as a physical book at the moment.
I don't currently have plans to make a physical book for a couple of reasons. Firstly is that it's really expensive.
Yeah.
Secondly is I don't think books are the future. I think ebooks are the future. Like, they are so convenient. They're so handy. They don't weigh anything. You can get them instantly. There are so many advantages to it. Plus, if you're a self-published author like myself, an independent author, you can get your book out to people. They used to call it vanity publishing, where you would print dozens or hundreds of copies at your own expense and then attempt to sell them. With this, it's the kind of opposite model where you don't have to do any of that. You just have to make your book available to people, and then you have to convince them to buy it. I currently have no plans to ever produce a printed copy for several reasons. Besides the expense, I'm not even sure I want a printed copy. I mean, it would be nice. It might be the kind of thing, if I ever end up going to conventions, like atheist conventions, humanist conventions, secularist conventions, I might do a very limited run, sell them at the convention and sign them.
Yeah.
Which would be quite nice, but
would actually give them a little bit more value to some people, wouldn't it? Yeah.
I have comic books that I've got signed, graphic novels that I've got signed by artists and authors, and I love those. But that's the only way I can see myself doing it in the future. But yeah, the book is available from anywhere you can buy ebooks. So Amazon is obviously the main one. Yeah. Amazon.com, .ca, .co.uk, and in Oz. But it's also available. There's a really good amalgam website where you upload it to Smashwords, and then they distribute it everywhere else. So
okay. Yep.
Apple, Barnes & Noble, the W.H. Smith one, Nook. Like, basically, it can be found everywhere. Best place to buy it is Amazon. It's the easiest and the biggest by far.
Yeah. And it's not expensive as an ebook. Is it a couple of quid, £3 or something like that? UK money?
40, something like that.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about that is that when you upload an ebook, when you buy an ebook of this kind, the author genuinely gets most of the money.
Yeah,
not all of it.
Yeah.
Amazon take their cut, but the author actually gets a reasonable percentage of the proceeds for that, which is also good.
Yeah.
I mean, the book is priced quite cheap in an attempt to encourage as many people as possible to buy it, read it, and review it.
Sure. There was a real issue when ebooks were becoming more popular. I'm thinking about 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago now, with the second and third generation Kindles. There was a time when ebooks were more expensive than physical books. Now that's changed. Now I think there was a fourth change there. Did that hurt the market, do you think, or is there it sounds silly saying it about an e-reader, but is there a renaissance now for the e-book?
Well, I think there's a real split between independent authors who do their own work and the publishing houses which don't have a huge interest and don't have a huge incentive to push e-books. They price e-books the same price, like you said, as their retail book. And I just find that to be utterly ridiculous, because if you buy an ebook, you're not paying for the store, you're not paying for the staff at the store, you're not paying for the shipping of the book, the printing of the book, everything that goes into getting that physical copy into a bookstore. You're just buying an electronic file that gets delivered to you wirelessly.
Yeah.
My impression, they should be as cheap as can be afforded. Like, I would rather get many people reading my book and make a small amount of money than charge more and get less readers. I mean, to me, especially when you're an independent author, getting people reading your book, getting them talking about their book with their friends, getting them talking with their family members on their social networks, that's how you launch an independent author's career, how you self-publish successfully. But obviously that's a completely different model than the publishing houses. I'm waiting for the day where you can just buy ebooks for pennies, because they're just electronic files.
Yeah.
That's it.
So, last question. This is one I've been kind of really wanting to ask. I ask this of a lot of people, actually, more when you get the knock on the door. Normally the Jehovah's Witnesses, sometimes the Mormons. If God or Jesus was to appear now, what do you think he or she would think about how the religious are looking to them now? What do you think the reaction, if there was a God, on how we are holding them?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is kind of the fundamental point of my book, really. Like, this is the fundamental question. If God arrived here and he started talking to us, what would he make of us and what would we make of him? I think he would think that religion has fundamentally missed the point. I think he would think that were you to use religion in evolutionary terms, it's a mechanism for steering people towards civility, away from barbarism. And unfortunately, there seems to be a point where you get to where a religion gets so much power that it then becomes barbaric in and of itself. It then enforces rigid rules on people. It turns people against gay people and against anyone who's an outsider because it reinforces its own power structure. I think religion was initially a thing that brought a community together and allowed them to thrive in competition with other communities. But then once you get to the point where it's all-encompassing, it then starts to turn on itself. I think God would think we'd missed the point. I think if we were going to ask him questions, we wouldn't get the answers we expect. Which again is part of the point of my book. Like in the book, he's the overseer of a giant bureaucratic intergalactic civilization that watches over us and tries to help us. And as such, they face all these problems. And the Big Bang in this universe in the book isn't his first Big Bang. It's the one that works.
Yeah.
He's a scientist. He's an inventor.
Yeah.
And he is as clueless of interacting with us as we are with him. So I think it's a fun way of like playing with these things, of experimenting with them, which we absolutely should be free to do. But obviously the religions won't want us to be doing this because it goes against everything that they want.
Yeah.
But I say it's fun.
Okay, so just to close up, we've got book available now. Second part of the series will be available hopefully for the 1st of January, and then in planning the third part. If people want to get hold of you, where's the best place that people can actually communicate with you?
So I'm on Twitter. I believe it's Only an Atheist 1.
Yeah.
Because I seem to remember Only an Atheist was taken, and I was really annoyed. Twitter's a good one to hit me up if people want to come say hello. If they read my book and they want to get in contact and let me know what they think, that's great. I'd love to hear from people. I have a blog at onlyanatheist.wordpress.com, I think it is. And like I said, I post all sorts of things on there, from my thoughts on various books I've read, various movies I've seen, to things like I did a post a while ago that was great fun where I talked about all the atheist comedies that seem to be out at the moment, because we seem to have a renaissance at the moment of loads of atheist comedies, things like Book of Mormon and there's Hand of God and there's all sorts of other ones as well.
Yeah.
So if people are interested, they're welcome to check that out. I have an email address as well, which I think is onlyanatheist@mail.com. But it's easier just to find me on Twitter.
Yeah. And we'll drop all those links into the show notes, so and the links to Amazon and all the other sites as well, so people can easily get that book. Now, hopefully you'll come back and join us again, because I'd be really interested in the second book, but also really interested in talking to you again on politics. Depending on what happens on November the 8th, the conversation could go absolutely anyway. So thanks for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Well, that really wasn't a long interview. And like I said at the start, that was a cut down version of 2 hours, or a little over 2 hours of recording. So I do hope there was something in that for everybody. Please do make sure you get out and read Matthew's books. All the links will be in the show notes, or just search on Amazon for Only an Atheist Can Help God Save the World, and it'll be right there. Now, I'll be back later on this week with whatever the breaking news is, but for my friends in America, just remember, your vote counts more than ever, so make sure you do use it. And as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for all the support. Don't forget to like and share and lols wherever possible. All the contact details are at skepticsmashtalk.com. And until next time, I've been Jason Jones, and this has been Skeptic Smash Talk.